This Quinn reading is often the student's favorite. It is very clear to read. That is why this video will finally be a short one. You don't need my help understanding most of this. I'm just going to illustrate a few key things and bring in some stories that I hope you'll find interesting. But make sure you take your time with the reading. It looks long, but it's absolutely friendly. I love the fact that this reading is a very deep idea about anthropological history, but it's written as if it's for a child, right? So please notice, you should have fun with this, and most people do. Let me just bring out some highlights. So first, what are the narrative stories we tell about how we came to be here? And let's look at both of them because you'll see they actually have the same moral at the end, right? The same message that they are really getting to. So start with the creation story found in, Judeo-Christian religions. What do we get in Genesis? You get God making everything from absolute scratch. On the first days of creation, right, the heaven and earth are separated, then the land is separated from the water, and what happens on the great sixth day? Well, we get the end of the story. What is the end of the story? The human being, technically man. Women is created secondarily because man is alone, and God says it is good. Now, what is the moral of this story? What are you ethically supposed to understand here? Everything is made for mankind. Man is the end of the story. Everything else was reaching that point. And so, for many Christians, how do they look at the world? They look at the world as theirs. It is for them. This planet is like, let's use a common metaphor, is like a spaceship with resources provided for human beings to travel along in their little lives. And is this how we often see religious people when they talk about things like pollution or climate change? Sure, right? God put this all here for us. It will be here as long as it needs to be. It is our little space station. Fine. Now, you are supposed to have a much more ethical treatment of the environment when we get to an evolution story. But how is this story usually told? What is it? All right, there is little subatomic particles in an ooze, and then they start, here, let's go Mr. Garrison here, right? And then a squirrel humps a fish, and you get more and more complicated forms of life until you get to the human being. You get the idea. And one of my favorite parts of this, of course, is the jellyfish, right? The anthropologist interviews the jellyfish and they tell the whole story of evolution and then say, and then the jellyfish. And that's the end of the story. Well, that's the way we tell the story. Evolution is over because it got to its goal. The whole thing was working really hard in order to attain the end result, which was humans. Now it's done. And so how should humans view the environment? And notice the pronouns they use. We need to save our planet. It's ours. These resources are ours. We need to protect them for us. And then we get the story. What is the moral of both of these stories? Everything can be used by us and exhausted for our use. Terrible. For my little talk, though, I want to focus on the key distinction that I've used in these excerpts, the lever-taker distinction. Let me read a bit first. So I am in the second paragraph on page 4, technically labeled chapter 8 of the actual book. Great book, by the way. You would love this book if you read it. This mythology of human superiority justifies their doing whatever they please with the world. Just the way Hitler's mythology of Aryan superiority justified his doing whatever he pleased with Europe. But in the end, this mythology is not deeply satisfying. The takers are a profoundly lonely people. The world for them is enemy territory, and they live in it everywhere like an army of occupation, alienated and isolated by their extraordinary specialness. Among the leavers, crime, mental illness, suicide, and drug addiction are great rarities. How does mother culture account for this? So now notice, mother culture are the reasons you are given by your socialization to justify the way you live. Now, pause there for a second. I want to ask a question. Have any of you ever been among a leaver subculture? You should read this first. Have you been around leavers? Most people haven't, but for instance, myself. In my young days, I was a surfer and we traveled fairly extensively to find, now notice how surfers are. Surfers don't want to go to popular places. They want to find isolated places where they can find some great surf to themselves. So we would travel to remote locations, especially in Mexico, where we could be by ourselves. And so we would find ourselves in these little isolated fishing villages that were these self-sustaining little places. They were very much, or we could say, they were almost complete lever societies. You got to read to understand what a lever is, but the idea. The key test of whether you've been in a lever society is I ask this question, is I ask, what were the people doing in the middle of the day? And that's the ultimate test, because here's what you find. If you're in a lever society, what are people doing in the middle of the day? Nothing. They are hanging out with their families, just chatting, right? Staying in the shade, usually pretty warm, and just sitting around. Maybe fiddling with a guitar, maybe listening to some music, right? The kids playing soccer or whatever they're doing. But not much is happening in the middle of the day. Now, let's tell a similar story about how a taker approaches this. The most crude taker would look at these people in the middle of the day and say, why aren't you guys at work? What a lazy society this is. That's so stupid. Let's use a very common meme story. We have a taker businessman on a vacation in a lever culture. This is where very much the most taker people, they like to relax when they're on vacation. What do they like to act like? Levers. So the taker executive comes down to the lever fishing village and sees the people relaxing in the middle of the day and says, why aren't you guys working? And then the lever says, well, we already did our work early in the morning. We are fishermen. We took the boat out and we had a really good catch. And so what do? We relax because we have all our resources we need for today. And so we spend time with our family. How does this story usually go? The taker says, wow, look at your catch of fish in just a couple hours. You should make the most of this. What you should be doing is fishing throughout the day, maybe even on weekends, to build up some extra surplus. And then you can use that surplus, sell it to the city, and hire more boats, hire more workers. And then you can expand your catch. And then when you expand your catch, you can expand your enterprise. You can become a company. And I'm telling you, within 30 years, you can retire and just relax with your family all the time and let other people work for you. Takers. What does the lever say? I like fishing. I like fishing a couple hours every morning, and why would I put off working extra hard and have a bunch of people working extra hard just so I can relax with my family all day? I do that already. I enjoy my task, it's fulfilling, and then I get to spend my leisure with my family. Notice, Quinn is dispelling that myth that says the way it was for lever societies was harsh and a struggle for survival. It usually wasn't. These were some of the most leisurely people in the history of the planet because it is not hard to forge an existence if you have decent resources. Fishing villages in Mexico, if you go deep and go out of the cities, they are like this. Anyway, read farther about the consequences of these two lifestyles. So I'm going to skip a couple more short little paragraphs. I'm in about the 5th indent on page 4. The story the takers have been enacting here for the past 10,000 years is not only disastrous for mankind and for the world, it's fundamentally unhealthy and unsatisfying. It's a megalomaniac's fantasy. And enacting it has given the takers a culture riddled with greed, cruelty, mental illness, crime, and drug addiction. The story the levers have been enacting here for the past 3 million years isn't a story of conquest and rule. Enacting it doesn't give them power. Enacting it gives them lives that are satisfying and meaningful to them. This is what you'll find if you go among them. They're not seething with discontent and rebellion, not incessantly wrangling over what should be allowed and what forbidden. How angry do you takers get about things like communism and about abortion and about guns and about how people should live and how often are you meddling in the way other people just do things. Why? Because you're not sure of how to live at all. When you find some little solution that seems to be working, you have to tell everyone that your life is the best. Not forever accusing each other of not living the right way, not living in terror of each other, not going crazy because their lives seem empty and pointless, not having to stupefy themselves with drugs, sorry potheads, and sorry you wine drinking Marges, right? To get through their days, not inventing a new religion every week. What is YouTube? YouTube is for finding what religion you're going to have that week. It is your new crystals, or your new diet, or your new exercise that's going to finally give your life meaning. Oh my God, right? Not inventing a new religion every week to give them something to hold on to, not forever searching for something to do or something to believe in that will make their lives worth living. Oh, I'm sorry, but that's just exactly right. But how satisfied and happy are takers compared to leavers? They couldn't be more different. The only real section of this that I might add some background to be helpful are these passages on pages 6 and 7 where he talks about these stories in Genesis, the fall and Cain and Abel and this stuff. So let me try to tell some background stories here. Let's first read. Second paragraph, page 6, right near the top of the page. After reading the story in all three versions, different translations, I looked up and said, what was happening all along that border was that Cain was killing Abel. The tillers of the soil were watering their fields with the blood of Semitic herders. Of course, what was happening there was what has always happening along the borders of taker expansion. The leavers were being killed off so that more land could be put under cultivation. Pause. If you, like we would do with Nietzsche, when we covered Nietzsche, if you think of all of the ancient cultures and civilizations that you study, even fairly modern ones, you would look and you would realize that these are all taker civilizations. Throughout all of history, even in the ancient biblical and historical times, what do you find? There are actually more leaver societies than taker societies. But what are the leaver societies doing? Surviving and living their little lives. So they aren't producing literature and plumbing and mathematics and philosophy and aqueducts and making pyramids. No, they're living their lives. And so our histories completely ignore them. What is the history of taker cultures? What do we see? What are they doing? Building great things and often in warfare against other people. Over what? Resources. Who are they killing off? Leavers. What you should do is go open the Bible to the books of Judges, Joshua, Kings. What do you find? Genocide. The taker societies that they're talking about are just slaughtering the leaver societies. Now, let's explain the history of war because it's the same. The history of war is formed mostly by the agricultural revolution. Let's talk about it on a small scale first. If you are a hunter-gatherer, a pastoralist, leaver society, your society keeps up with the resources you have. You are not going to have a huge community if the resources don't support it. You will keep on the move, very small-scale groups, right, and follow the resources. Notice what happens when you become a taker. And now notice how this overlaps with the story of Genesis and the fall in chapter 3. The idea is the perfect Eden before the fall was what? Adam and Eve lived in the garden, God provided everything they needed, and they had no shame, and so on. Well, this is the picture of the leaver society. Nature provides what they want, they trust God to provide for it, and notice how takers come along and look at leaver societies and laugh at them and say, oh, look at your rain dance, you really think that makes it rain? No, the rain dance is appreciation for God always bringing the rain and bringing the supplies. You dance because you know rain will come. Anyway, so go back to the story. So what happens? They're living this way and then they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so what's the basic story? It's the agricultural revolution that coincides with this fall. What happens? And now notice, this is what's insane, is we keep hearing Christians, for example, this is a discussion of human nature. You hear Christians, and what is their view of human nature? People are selfish and depraved and aggressive and can't be trusted. They're all fallen and sinful. But that's not how they were originally designed. They were originally designed as being content, provided for, and trustworthy. And they ditched that behind in favor of, the parallel, agriculture. And what did they become? It was a punishment. The fall is a punishment for this kind of a choice of life. Instead of trusting God, now you trust yourselves, and you are being punished. What are the punishments? Read the Bible. If you can read it without it bursting into flames, right? I don't think anybody reads it anymore. What does it say? You will earn your living by the sweat of your brow. Notice, hard work. And the ground will resist you. It will not give up its resources easily. You will be in a fight with it. What is this? Alienated labor, suffering to try to make a surplus instead of trusting God for what you need. Here, read further. Go to the third last indent on page 6. That's it. They're acting as if they were the gods themselves. They're acting as if they eat at the God's own tree of wisdom, as though they were as wise as the gods and send life and death wherever they please. Yes, that's it. That's what must have happened. These people found the God's own tree of wisdom and stole some of its fruit. Yes, right. These are an accursed people. You can see that right off the bat. When the gods found out what they had done, they said, okay, you wretched people, that's it for you. We're not taking care of you anymore. You're out. We banish you from the garden. From now on, instead of living on our bounty, you can wrest your food from the ground by the sweat of your brows. And that's how these accursed tillers of the soil came to be hunting us down and watering their fields with our blood. What is the cause of war? Seeking more and more resources, seeking more and more laborers for your agricultural factories and mining. That's the idea. We always pretend that wars are about some ideological problem, or they're about a conflict of faith. It's about Christianity versus Islam or something like that. No, that's just what you tell the people so they'll fight for you. You give them this fake narrative that this is about freedom or it's about faith. No, it's not. These are people trying to take over more land and resources because agricultural societies can never have enough resources because their populations keep growing and growing, and you need more workers and more land to keep up with this. Exactly. That is what wars have always been about. Now, today it's a little more focused. If you look at the history of U.S. wars, they're about some ideology that tells the people that land in Vietnam, that land in El Salvador, that land in Nicaragua, Angola, Chad, Indonesia is ours, and we need it. We need that oil, we need that tin, we need those pineapples. That's what we fight for. Or maybe it's even a little more subtle. We're fighting for labor markets for our products. Still, we need constant expansion because we're fighting the earth to keep up with our population. And so go back to a story like Cain and Abel. The Cain and Abel story is the archetype for almost every war. What do you find? The agriculturalists are attacking and overthrowing the pastoralists and hunter and gatherers and making them their slaves. This is the history of slavery. We need to bring in slaves because we need more people doing the hard work of working the ground to get it to give us its supplies. And do the rich people want to do this? No. So you need more slaves, more workers doing the hard work of getting more and more resources than even the planet wants to give. And so God is continuing to punish you for not trusting him to provide for your lives. You want more and more, you think this is the good life. Now, another favorite part of mine is this idea where, let's pretend, you have a simple button that you have found, and if you push this button, you and your loved ones will be immediately transported into a lever sort of culture or society. Now, let's also pretend that the button would also give you some basic skill, right? You would know how to farm, you would know how to fish, you would know how to do things that are actually useful to your little society. Fine. Would you push the button? Some of you are saying, I would absolutely. In fact, I'm trying to live my life like a lever. I am trying to keep my needs to a minimum. I love this idea of the minimalist movement. What is it? It's just a lever. It is people in an affluent society trying to live more like levers. It's beautiful, right? If it's honest, it's great. Some of you would push the button, but most of you wouldn't. Why? Because you are in a fight. This is a competition. It is not going well for you or your family most of the time, but you still have to win. I can't give up and just have a good life. I have to keep fighting this. My plans are big. I want mini shoes. I want a fancy car. Sure, I'm miserable. You're reading Smith next. Wait to see how this goes. I'm using Quinn as a simple illustration of the kind of thing Rousseau is talking about. People will fight. You will read about the young man in Smith. That is the taker society, and you are hooked by it. And mother culture whispers in your ear, this is all for the best. Those levers are losers, right? Look at how they dress. You don't want to be one of them. They only seem happy. We are happy. Sorry. Have fun with your drug addiction, your alienation. Have fun telling everyone how they should live. We will simply live a simple life. Let me finish with just one more little story in here. I love this thing, and now let's put this together with the idea people have of faith. Whatever the religion is, right? The idea is that we have this, what does faith mean? Trust. It means you trust in God. What is the essence of all faith? It's like what the Stoics said, to trust God with those things that you can't control. Do takers like to trust God? No. So let's talk about what it means to actually have faith. Now, of course, that faith could be diverse. It could be traditional faith in God. It could be faith in nature, faith in the Tao, any of these things. So let's look at the part of this where they're mimicking a lever citizen talking to a taker citizen, and the taker is trying to explain why the lever's life is an embarrassment because it's not futuristic enough. It's not developed. Okay, so let's look at it. Taker starts. Yes, but if you planted the crops yourself, you could control how much food there was. You'd be able to say, well, this year we'll have more yams, this year we'll have more beans, this year we'll have more strawberries. Bwana, these things grow in abundance without the slightest effort on our part. Why should we trouble ourselves to plant what is already growing? Yes, but don't you ever run out? Don't you ever wish you had a yam but find there are no more growing wild? Yes, I suppose so, but isn't it the same for you? Don't you ever wish you had a yam but find there are no more growing in your fields? No, because if we wish we had a yam, we can go to the store and buy a can of yams. Yes, I have heard something of this system. Tell me this, Bwana. The can of yams that you buy in the store, how many of you labored to put that can there for you? Oh, hundreds, I suppose. Growers, harvesters, truckers, cleaners at the canning plant, people to run the equipment, Carl the coal miner to run electricity to the plant, people to pack the cans in cases, truckers to distribute the cases, people at the store to unpack them, and so on. Forgive me, but you sound like lunatics, Bwana. To do all this work just to ensure that you can never be disappointed over the matter of a yam? Among my people, when we want a yam, we simply go and dig one up. And if there are none to be found, we find something else just as good, and hundreds of people don't need to labor to put it into our hands. Pause. In the next book called My Ishmael, Quinn tells the key story of how the rich people lock up the food so that the poor people have to work in these mines and factories in order to have access to the food, where really they could just have their own food, but that is the key to having a society of alienation like ours. Go to the last page, right where it says number 6. Far and away the most futile admonition Christ ever offered was when he said, have no care for tomorrow. Don't worry about whether you're going to have something to eat. Look at the birds of the air. They never sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, but God takes perfect care of them. Don't you think he'll do the same for you? End quote. In our culture, the overwhelming answer to that question is, hell no, we will take over everything for ourselves. We don't trust God. So who is more faithful? The simple, simplistic leaver, or you, the takers, who use religion to help you cope with your alienated lives and then pretend that you have the real faith? No. Oh, and what's even worse? What is the whole history of the colonizing period? The justification for colonization is you take over and kill these leaver sorts of societies in order so that you could bring them faith and bring them civilization. What did you basically do? Enslaved all the peoples of the world because you needed more land for agriculture and more laborers in your mines. Exactly. That's history.